Have you enjoyed the fall weather? We're only in day 2, or is it day 3 of fall? It's been pretty good. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody this morning. Our visitors. We have some visitors from Edmonton. They were in our class. Is there anybody else here, a visitor? I like visitors. In fact, I love visitors. Well, I got turned on at camp meeting. I listened to a fellow by the name of Kevin Whiffley. Who was there at camp meeting that heard any of his sermons? He got me all wound up, and I really got into what he had to say. And what I've done, this is an excerpt from 3 of his. He spoke for 5 times, and he spoke anywhere up to an hour and a half a day, so there's a lot of stuff. And I really got into what he said about how to make a church happy, and what real happiness is about, and why we meet as a church, why we exist as a church. And so I got into really into his sermons and what he was presenting there. And when I got home, I went online. I actually got the set. So if anybody wants to know more on this topic, I have the set of 5 DVDs that come with it. But I didn't have them at the time, so I listened online. You know, they stream it all, and you can get. Well, they missed 2 of his, but there were 3 that were online. So what I did, I listened to it, and my sermon today, I got so fired up, I couldn't help myself. I had to do this. So this is Kevin. This is stuff I got from Kevin, what he talked about in 3 of his sermons, and I've kind of reworked it, put it together, and made today's presentation based on that. This resonated with me in a big way, and so I have to share it. I have no choice. So you're going to have to bear with me. I hope I don't bore you, but I have some things that really touch my heart, and I don't think I'm an anomaly. So if it touched my heart, I think it'll probably touch your heart too. And I'm going to challenge you at the end of this talk today, and well, when I get there, you'll know what it's about. But I can sum this up, and this is what makes a happy church, and I can sum it up in 7 words. A happy church is a growing church. Growth is the byproduct of a happy church. So if you're really happy, you're going to do something about it. When you're having church and it's a happy church and you're joyful in Jesus, the church is going to grow. That's an inevitable result. You can't do anything else. I mean, it's like if you put your finger in the fire, it's going to get burnt. There's absolutely no question that your church will grow. So as Christians, it is our purpose to attract Jesus. Therefore, it is our first task to become a happy Christian. Because you're not going to attract anybody if you're not happy. And you say, aren't all Christians happy? No. Christianity can become just a religion. And a religion doesn't make you happy. Religions really have very little to do with happiness. There are a lot of people that just do things, but that doesn't make you happy. If your faith and your Christianity becomes a religion, it's not going to do much for you. But it's all in that relationship with Jesus. And if you have a relationship with Jesus and are a follower of Jesus, you will be happy. So doing things doesn't make you happy. You can do all kinds of things. There's a lot of churches out there, they do things. If you do this on this day and you do that on that day, and this time of the year you do this, and then that time of the year you do that, that is not going to make you happy. That's just going to keep you busy. So you can have a whole ritual in your life, but that doesn't have there's no connection between that and happiness. The Bible says that in the last days, people will come to Jesus and say, Lord, did we not do this and did we not do that in your name? And he will say, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that practice iniquity. So it doesn't really have anything to do with being happy in Jesus. And that comes from Matthew 7. It's taken from 21 to 23. Now, I like this, and he shared this at camp meeting. It was from Elder Kuhn. How many of you ever heard of Elder Kuhn? I think he passed away, didn't he? He used to come to Camp Hope occasionally on the odd camp meeting. I've heard him speak. And he was a great, more of the old school preachers, you know, and he'd really get into his stuff. And he talked about the concept of mad Venists, sad Venists, bad Venists, and his favorite one was glad Venists. Now, I want to be a glad Venist, don't you? Everybody should be a glad Venist. If you can be a glad Venist, then you're going to attract people. being a mad Adventist or a sad Adventist has nothing to do with attracting people. In fact, it's going to drive people away. You will never find an unhappy or sad soul winner. Show me a person who is sharing Jesus with people and who is successful in winning people to Christ, and you will show me a happy Christian. So the two naturally go together. So how do we get assurance in how can we be assured of our salvation? And I want to read this. And to be truly happy, we need to have the assurance of salvation, but that only happens as we get to know Jesus. So our first task is to know Jesus and have a personal relationship with him so we can be a happy Christian, and then share him with others. And the more we share him with others, the happier we will be and the more assured of our salvation. So the more we get involved with sharing Jesus, the happier we're going to be, and the happier we're going to be, we're just going to know Jesus loves us, and we're going to know he wants us. And when we go to sleep at night, we're not going to think. And I used to think this. Seriously, I did. I go to sleep at night and I'm thinking, it's not uncommon for people to die at night when they're sleeping. I know of a few that have. And I often thought, well, if I died in the night, would I be saved? Does that speak of assurance and salvation? Not very much, does it? If you go to sleep at night and think that, you have no assurance. We should know that when we've accepted Jesus, we're saved. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be unsaved, but as long as we're focused on him. It's kind of like to be saved and to have assurance. It gives you great peace and comfort, doesn't it? Salvation, to be truly into Jesus and to understand salvation and feel accepted, you have to share. And part of this, let me explain it this way. It's like a how many here know what a three-legged milk stool looks like? It's a stool with three legs, right? Has anybody ever seen one? Do we know about it today? I mean, most of us, you go to a dairy barn, they just stand in a deep pit and they have these things they stick on the cow and that does it. But in the old days, you had to squat and sit right beside the cow, and you can't do that without a stool. And a three-legged milk stool, you remember a stool with two legs, what's it do? It falls over, doesn't it? So a stool has to have a minimum of three legs. And that's the way it is with our faith. If we have to have three legs to remain strong and stable in our walk with Jesus. And the three legs are Bible study, prayer, and sharing. And if we don't share, what happens? We get stagnant. It's we get stuck in our experience with Jesus. And nobody wants to be stuck. Have you ever been stuck? What if you're out on 4x4ing and you get stuck? Are you happy? People that are stuck are not happy. Have you ever been in the snow stuck? Being stuck is a bad place to be. I remember I was in the Chilcote, and I used to work for the Federal Forestry, and I was gone 2 to 3 or more months a year. And I was all over the province, and we used to have a 4x4 with a winch, and we would sometimes get stuck. And I can remember, I got to share this because this was one of the most unpleasant stuck places I was. We were going along and we went out into an area that had been cleared, and it looked good. It looked drivable, looked smooth, flat, but it was all like soup. And we went sliding out into it, and all four wheels went down, and we spent about 2 hours. And it was gumbo. Have you ever seen gumbo? You walk in gumbo and your feet get this big and you can't pick them up. And when you have a shovel to dig, you put it on the shovel and you go to throw it and you can't get it off the shovel wants to go with it. We spent 2 hours, mud everywhere. That's being stuck. Nobody wants that. And a perfect example of this, of course, is the Dead Sea. It receives and it never gives. And what happened to the Dead Sea? Can anybody tell me what happened to the Dead Sea? Is it drinkable? You can swim in it. It's so full of stuff because it never gives. The Dead Sea never gives. And it probably stinks a bit. I don't think it's very... I think Bob Sweetak isn't here this morning, but he swam in it. Who else has swam in it? Does anybody? You have? Does it stink, or does it just... It's just pretty thick, isn't it? Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you don't give. If you study, you read and study and pray, but you don't share, it's not a pretty place to be. Did you know in this area that we live, there are 22,000 people? Did you know that? Okay. That was a census, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago. It's one that popped up on Google. Google's great. But did you know if there are 10% of the people out there, they would give their lives to Jesus if invited by someone they knew and trusted? Did you know that? There's been studies done. 10% of the people. Now, I don't know if in this area it's exactly that, but where this study was done, we're in a very secular society, but where this study was done, and I suspect we're not too far off, 10%, if they were invited to Jesus and they had the opportunity and they knew and trusted you, eventually they would give their heart to Jesus. Did you know that there's another 86% right in this community that if you went and invited them, asked them to come to church, 86% would come to church. They might not, but they would come to church. They would actually be sitting beside you. Did you know that? So that means that there would be 22,200 people in this community right in North Saskatchewan, Sydney. That's the census that would actually, 2,200 would actually accept Jesus. And another 18,920 would come to church. Do you ever think about that? That's amazing, isn't it? These are people out there. The only problem is we have to find them. And if we don't go out and talk to them, they'll never come. We have to actually, and the thing is, do you know the common factor here? What did I say? What was the commonality in these two statements? They have to what? They have to know, like, and trust you. See, there has to be a friend. It's not just somebody you go up to. It's not like you just bump into somebody and just say, they probably say, what? Who are you? No, there has to be a relationship. So sharing Jesus is all about a relationship, isn't it? It's about getting to know people and being their friend. Did you know also, this is another study that was done, did you know if you told somebody about the love of all the Christians in the world, that all denominations, but Christians, there's a lot of Christians out there, and if you went and shared the gospel with someone, one person, everybody shared it with one, and those people that you shared it with one, and then you shared it with one more, did you know how long it would take to tell the gospel to the whole world? Does anybody have an idea? It would take 8 hours. 8 hours. Now, I don't know if that applies. I don't know when this study was done, but when this study was done, I don't think this is that old. But this is what I got from Kevin's stuff. But that's amazing, isn't it? So we just got off our duff and did some stuff. If Jesus says, what's he say when the gospel goes to all the world, what's going to happen? He's going to come. Didn't he say that? So are we interested in that happening? Now, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I have really messed up in my life. Here I am. You think maybe I'm a little younger than I am. I'm not going to share my age. But I've been going on all my life, and I really haven't been that active in doing this. I really haven't. I really think I messed up. Why don't I do that? Well, if I talk to this person, if I talk to that person, I'm afraid they might say no. They might say to me, get on my face. So I am hesitant to do that. Is that a good excuse? I don't know. But another point I want to bring out here. Did you know sharing the gospel is not sharing ideas? We can share all kinds of ideas. We can get on such an idea like, well, the 144,000, are they real or are they literal? We can get on, what would be another thing? Well, we could talk about women's ordination, should there be women? You know, we can get all these issues, things that have nothing to do with salvation. In fact, these things, all they do is mess us up. If people come and we invite a visitor in and they hear that in the Sabbath school lesson or in here, or they hear people arguing and debating all these things on, is this the way it is? They don't even like that. It turns them off. In fact, people don't want to come to a church that's chewing on this and chewing on that. But they want to hear about Jesus. And they need to hear about Jesus. And that's what we should be talking about, because we only exist as a church for that reason. That's the actual only reason we're here today. The only reason. There's no other reason. Did you know there are actually lost souls in our church? You know, we think, well, I'm in a church, everybody. No, there are souls. We have to find these people in our church. We have to share the love of Jesus with them. We don't know who they are. We can't point fingers at anybody. Could be me. But we have to share Jesus' love with other people. And Kevin says that he's actually shared. Now, this is all about the gospel presentation. How many of you, well, you all did, because I printed them off. You all have this. I gave you a little printout. It says gospel presentation on it. You all have that. This is about how to, and I've memorized most of this. I was determined, I made a vow that I was going to memorize it. What this does, one reason I didn't share, and I don't share, we don't have an excuse, but one reason I used was that you ask a person, and the opportunities pop up all the time about sharing Jesus, but you say, well, I say the initial question, and then they respond, and then I say, what do I do now? Where do I take it? How do I proceed? This gospel presentation actually gives you a formula, kind of a blueprint that you can use it guides you, and you adapt it you don't just quote it like this, you learn it, and then what you do, you adapt it to the individual situation. So you totally adapt it, but it gives you a framework in which to couch what you're saying. So that's all it really does. So you learn this and you have it in your head, and then you can adapt it to fit the individual person that you're talking to. It just gives you, and it'll lead a person right to Jesus. I got really turned on by it, and it just happened that at camp meeting when I resonated with this, and I had an opportunity to get up front because I periodically am asked to fill a spot. So I'm here today sharing this, and this turned me on so much I had to share it with you this morning. But there are souls lost right in our church, and we don't point our fingers at anybody, but opportunities arise when you talk to people. You find out where they are, and if they're struggling in an area, that's when you connect with them, and you grow together. You connect with they have a problem, you have a problem, we share with one another, and that's how we grow our faith. And that's how we can take from going in a place of doubt, or concern. We're struggling, and somebody can uplift us and help us in our understanding. You may be the only one that can share. The pastor can't always get around to everybody. You may be that person. I'm going to share with you a little story. This is a story about Bill. Bill was a nurse, and he worked at a home. It was actually a hospice, and there was a woman at this place that was terrified of dying. And Bill came to Kevin, and he said, what do I tell her? She is in a terrible state. She's afraid, she's just terrified of dying, and she was going to die. She was in a hospice, so there was that was a given, but what do I tell her? He says, do I tell her about the state of the dead? Do I tell her how to become an Adventist? And Kevin said, no, don't tell her about death. Tell her about life and living. And Kevin said, what do you mean? And he said, well, she needs the gift of salvation. Have you ever presented the gospel to anyone? And Kevin said, or Bill said, I don't know how to do that. Well, Pastor Kevin said, well, give me 30 minutes and I'll show you how. So they went over the gospel presentation. And after going over it all, he said, Kevin said to Bill, he says, now let's practice this. You have to learn this. And he said, you learn this. So Bill got really scared because Kevin said it looked like a deer with headlights in his eyes. He was terrified. He didn't know. But they worked on it. And after Bill got the gospel presentation, he learned it enough, and he said, well, I think I can do that. I think I can go with that. I got enough of it, I think. So Monday morning, Bill is back at the hospice, and the woman, well, I missed one important part of this, because if anyone was going to lead this lady to Jesus, it wasn't going to be the unbelieving nurses and doctors. They weren't part of the equation. And it wasn't going to be Kevin, because this woman hated preachers and the church. She had, I guess, a bad experience. So there was no way Kevin, the pastor, could in any way share Jesus with this woman. And that's why Kevin said to Bill, you are the one. You have to do this. And that's why it behooves us to have something like this in our head, so that when these opportunities arise, we are ready and we can share Jesus. So Bill goes back. He goes back Monday morning, and this is what he says. He goes by her bedside, and she looks up at him, and she says, I'm so afraid. And Bill takes her hand, and he says, I have something to share with you that might help. And she says, oh, please. And Bill shares with her all the steps of this presentation that I just was talking about. And when he got to this place, is there any reason why you would not want to accept Jesus as your personal Savior? She says, no, there is no reason that I would not want to do that. So he led her through the whole thing, and then she repeated the prayer, because there's a prayer in here of accepting Jesus into her heart, and that was all done, and she said amen. She laid her head back on the pillow, and her whole body relaxed, and she says, I'm not afraid to die now. I know that I have Jesus. And the tears rolled down her cheeks, and the tears rolled down Bill's cheeks as well. And as he continued to hold her hand, and Bill told Kevin, Pastor, I can't wait to do that again. Now, there's power in that, isn't there? There's power in that, because it's not just talking. It's not just a bunch of words. These are words that led a woman to Jesus. There's power in that. I mean, it's not just saying words. Words have power. And this word, there was no other way that he could present. This woman needed Kevin at this time, and he was ready, see? And these opportunities present themselves to you and me. Now you say, well, I'm afraid. I'm a shy person. I could never do that. There are extroverts, and there are introverts. There's a few extroverts, but most of us are probably introvert a little bit. We don't jump up every moment. In a meeting, how many people stand up here when we have a testimonial? There's 3 or 4 or half a dozen. Most of us just sit quietly. I'm an introvert. I may not appear to be an introvert, but I grew up an introvert. And Kevin said he was an introvert. I grew up in a small island. I grew up in a home church. And we only went away once a year to visit relatives. I knew the same 10 or 12 people all year long. I was a shy person. I went to academy. It was a big shock to my system to go to academy, a boarding academy. I didn't know anybody, and that was a shock to me, because I love my own company. I'm a I don't know how you describe me, but it's not. I don't like to mix. I have a lot of friends, and I love this church. But if I can do it, anybody can do this. Now, I haven't done this. I'm determined to do it, though. I got so fired up with this thing that I had to, I put this together. I spent hours getting this material from off the streaming, and I was able to listen to it and copy it down. And that's how I got this gospel presentation. He presented it there. But this is powerful stuff that we need to have in our hearts. We need to have it in our head so we have a system. So when we say the first thing, it leads us and allows us the comfort and a plan in our mind that we can kind of follow, and it leads a person right to Jesus. That's the power in it. Well, you're going to think, how would I know when to share with a person? How would I find that person? I'm going to give you a couple of points how this can happen. When would you know the right time? Well, they've done studies, and people are vulnerable at the point of crises in their life. People are vulnerable to the Spirit of God, and always in times of crises. So what you do, if you're at work, you're maybe at a store, you're somewhere with a person, and there's a bit of, you know them, they know you as a person, and you're listening, you're watching, and this is what happens. If a person says to you, I've got to go to the doctor, that's a crisis. I'm having a problem with my marriage. That's a crisis. That's a bell ringing. People hear that. You hear that, I mean. And there's something going on with their life. That person is in pain. And that person is now open. Because these are points in their life when they need a friend. They need somebody. Let me see. So you got to be a good listener. Now, this is what you can do. So let's say that you work with this person, but you're not very close with them. And you're an acquaintance at work, but you could give them something. They're in pain. You hear this. This point of crisis, and some people make things. But if you don't make something, you can go down and buy something. But give them a little gift and say, "I'm thinking about you," and then you walk away. And if you're not the type of person that makes stuff, you can buy it here. I'm willing to listen. More times than not, person at home, because sometimes we don't want to share certain things. You could even go and ask for a cup of flour. Have contact. Make a point and a reason to interact with people. Now I want to give you a case study here. I'll read this. This is a study that Kevin said he was currently doing. He's currently talking to a person in crisis who is not a member of his church. And this is how, step by step, how he shares how it works. He knows that person well enough so that he can talk to them. So he phones them up from time to time, and he says, well, the way it was, this person, of course, had a crisis, and he picked up on that. So now what he's doing, he's following through. And he phones them from time to time, and he says, how are you doing? And this person phones back, and he'll tell him his problem, what is going on at that point in time. And their relationship keeps growing. And then Kevin began when his friends simply made a comment, and Kevin said he would listen. But don't offer advice. Just listen. But as the relationship grows, he may say, what about this? And then you can answer it. So you're just a listener. And the big question is, though, you've developed a relationship now because you're communicating over a period of time. It could be weeks, it could be days, months, weeks. But at some point, you're going to think, well, when do I share the gospel? When do I share the presentation? And Kevin tells a story of his son. His son was going to college, and his son would come home, and his son would say, Dad, how do you find the right girl? How do you know when you found the right girl? Where is that girl? He says, how would you know that? And his dad would say, you'll know. What do you mean you know? What do you mean you'll know? Well, you'll know. You'll just know. You'll know when you know. I mean, he said, that's impossible to answer. You can't give a checklist. When you know, you'll know. So his son was very frustrated with this. And over a period of time, his son finally comes home, and he finally says, Dad, I found the girl. I found the girl. I found the right one. And today, they're married. And as Kevin says, He's a Canadian. They live in Kelowna, and they're happily married ever after. He says, yeah, I found the girl. When I found the right one, I knew. I just knew. So in this dialogue with this person, it could be at work, it could be a person at the store, somebody where you do business with. When you develop that relationship, the point I'm getting at here is you are proactive. You're looking for these opportunities, and when they come, you connect with that person, and you start to develop a relationship. Even before there's any crises, you're developing, or maybe a crisis could pop up, and it hits you right in the face. But you can start relationships all over. But the thing is, you have to be proactive in thinking about that in your mind. I want to close with a story. This is a story that impacted me more than anything in the whole week. This is an amazing story, and I'm going to finish my talk today about it. This is a story about Jerry. This is a powerful story. I've never heard a story quite as powerful. It impacted me like probably no other story in this genre has ever impacted me. Jerry was a gun collector, and he was going to commit suicide with his favorite gun. But before he went to commit, he wanted to visit a friend before he did it. So what he did, he drove to his friend's place, and when he got there, his friend wasn't home. And he said, wouldn't you know? Wouldn't you know, my friend isn't home. So let me start the story. After that, Jerry is driving back home, and he goes by the Adventist church. And at the Adventist church, the teacher, there was a school there, and the teacher was just leaving. And he saw her in the yard. He pulled in, and the teacher said she was actually scared of Jerry. He was a wild and woolly-looking guy, and he was looking for the pastor. And he said he didn't know why he stopped there, but we know why, of course. But she gave him the pastor's address or phone number, and he goes home, and he phones the pastor, and he says, I need to talk to somebody. Well, the pastor, Pastor Kevin, he was a little bit concerned based on what the teacher told him, so he asked one of his elders to come because he didn't know what he would find. They go to Jerry's place. Jerry lives in a little trailer, and he tells his story. He says, maybe I don't want to miss part of this. And this is what Jerry said. I wanted to catch this bit here. He says, the pastor comes in with his elder, and they sit down at this little table in a small trailer in the kitchen. And this is what Jerry said to Kevin. He says, I can't believe I've fallen so low as to have a pastor in my home. And Pastor Kevin says, well, Jerry, why do you feel that way? He says, I've been an iron worker all my life. He says, those bridges in Portland? Anybody been here to Portland? Downtown Portland, the Willamette River runs through Portland. It's a fair-sized little river, and it's just covered. There's just a maze of bridges, iron bridges. And he says, I had part in building all those bridges. He says, I was afraid of nothing. He says, I would stand right on the beam, and when they put the other in it, I would spot weld it in place. He says, I was afraid of nothing, but I hated Christians. Any Christian I found that came to the job, I would harass him until he left. I hated Christians. Every one of them, I drove them away. He said, I would persecute them. I would heckle them. I would do everything possible to get rid of them. And then he said, I've come to the place in my life where I've tried everything. There's no joy. There's no hope. There's nothing in this world that's any good. And he made a long list of stuff he tried, all kinds of stuff. He said, there's nothing. Jerry, Kevin said, Jerry, have you tried? You have tried everything, but you haven't tried Jesus. And Jerry said, is he a real person? Well, yes, absolutely. How so? And when Kevin got to the, and Kevin, let me start here again. And Kevin said, may I share with you how I came to know Jesus? And Jerry said, sure. And when Kevin got to the place where he'd finished his testimony, he said, Jerry, you've tried everything. Is there any reason why you wouldn't want to give Jesus a try? And Jerry said, there's no reason. Then Kevin replied, do you feel comfortable praying out loud and asking Jesus to forgive your sins and be your Savior? And Jerry said, no, I've never prayed before. I don't know how. So Kevin said, would you feel comfortable repeating a prayer after me? So Jerry repeats Kevin and follows along in the prayer. And when they were praying, Kevin suddenly stops in the middle and he grabs Kevin's arm and he said, did you see that? And Kevin says, see what? And Jerry says, while we were praying, you were kneeled. You were on your knees with your eyes shut. But I was looking up to where God is in heaven. And I felt this thing leave my body, he said. And I looked up. And there in the ceiling was this man-like creature with an evil look on his face, looking down on me. And he went through the ceiling. He says, what was that? And Kevin said, weren't you going to kill yourself earlier? That was the evil angel or the devil that was causing you to want to do that. And a look of wonderment came over Jerry's face. And he said to Kevin, he says, I've never felt this way before. What is it? And Kevin said, what are you feeling? And he says, I feel good. He says, I feel really good. He says, I feel happy for the first time in my life. I've never felt happy like this ever before. What is that? Well, didn't you ask Jesus to come into your life? And he says, yes. Did you mean it? I hope so. I tried to. Well, that's Jesus, Kevin said. Well, Jerry said, I like that very much. And then they finished the prayer, and Kevin welcomed Jerry into the family of God. And this is what he says. Your sins are now forgiven according to the Bible. Your name is written in the book of life. Jesus is now living in your heart, and you are a fellow Christian. And Jerry shook Kevin's hand firmly, and he said, yes. He said, welcome. And Kevin said, I would like to have Bible studies. I'll be back here Wednesday. You have a Bible? No, I don't have a Bible. A few days later, Kevin comes back to Jerry's place, and Jerry says, do you see that tree over there? And Kevin says, yes. Well, he says, Kevin says, what kind of a tree is it? And Jerry said, well, it's an apple tree. After you left, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. He says, I was so happy, I couldn't sleep. He says, I started talking to God. And I got up and I was looking all around my house and I saw something over there. And I said, you don't need that. So I got it and I put it by the door. And I went around and I went to every room in the house. And I got my whiskey bottles and my beer bottles and I emptied them out and I put them by the door. And I got my porn and I put it by the door. And I took all my drugs and I put them by the door. And I thought, I don't need that stuff anymore. And then I got to thinking, I have this big pile of stuff there by the door, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Well, I think I'll bury it. So it's at the middle of the night, and he says, I went out and I started digging a hole. I was going to bury that stuff. So he says, I dug and I dug and I dug, and I'm digging away there in the middle of the night, and I'm thinking, well, how deep should I dig this hole? Well, 6 feet, that's what they bury. So I was digging this hole 6 feet deep. He says, I dug right down, and then I got a bag, and I put all that stuff in. And I'm thinking, I'm burying the old Jerry. So I put all that stuff in a bag, and I put it in the hole, and I started covering it up. And then I thought, well, this isn't good enough. I'm going to get a tree. So I stopped digging, and that's why I got that tree. I went and bought a tree, and I put it in, and I planted it. That's why the tree's on top. And I covered up the old Jerry, and I buried him. And there it is, all buried underneath that tree. To me, that's an amazing story, and it's a true story. Sharing the gospel presentation might seem just like another soul-winning strategy, but it's more than that. It might be something you'd learn in any old class, but it's more than that. In those words, there's power to change a soul. And it could be your children, it could be your grandchildren, it could be a loved one, a family member, a dear friend. But by following this plan, you have a way of pulling people and sharing Jesus with them. And when you do that, it'll make you happy, because when you see these people baptized and come to Jesus, Kevin says there are no words for that. He says, this is what Kevin, I'm quoting Kevin, he says, I don't even know how to describe that to you. That will be the happiest day of your life. And you will be so addicted to this that you will be saying, where can I find another person that I can share Jesus with? So the challenge this morning is, in your bulletin, anybody, I want to help people form a group. What I want to do is, I'm going to be at the back, and if anybody is interested in following through, because on your own it's easy to get sidetracked and not focused, but I'd like to, if you're interested in pursuing this and learning the gospel presentation and actually using it. Kevin said nothing has impacted his life more. He says, he's an educated man. I don't know what his degree is. He says, I've taken studies on everything, great studies on everything, but he says, of all the studies I've ever taken in my life, there's nothing that has impacted me and my friend and people around me more than this gospel presentation that he learned years ago. He says there's nothing has come close to what it's done in my life and by being able to share it, because it's powerful, and if you learn it, then you've got a framework, a way of talking to people that you would never. Like I have hesitated in my own experience because I just think, I don't know what to say, how am I going to do it? This gives you a framework to follow through and to lead people to Jesus. He says it's very powerful. So what I'm going to stand at the back, and on the front of the bulletin, or in the front of the bulletin, there's that little thing, check off gospel presentation, put your name in that on, and I'll be standing at the door. If you want to, we could, if anybody's interested, I'm just inviting you. Give it to me, and we'll get together and we'll talk about it. And we can. I'd like to have a group that would want to learn the gospel presentation. Kevin said that Pastor Kevin said that if he even gets a few people, 4 or 5 in a church, it's amazing how over a period of time you win people to Christ. It's just amazing. It pulls people in. It could be anybody you know that you know, and you just watch for these points of crises and start friending people and have it in the back of your mind that you have this sort of a. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for not getting up and walking out.